The first warning came just before dawn. Israeli radar operators, staring at their screens, saw a streak of light climbing fast over Iran, moving faster than anything they had ever tracked. At first, they thought it was a malfunction, a false signal. But within seconds, the truth became undeniable. A missile was screaming toward the upper atmosphere at more than 5 times the speed of sound, maneuvering so unpredictably that no defense system could lock on. Sirens began wailing across northern Israel. In Haifa, families jolted awake, rushing to stairwells and underground shelters as the alarms cut through the quiet morning. In Tel Aviv, air defense crews scrambled to stations, their screens glowing red with warnings. The Iron Dome missile batteries, designed to intercept rockets and drones, could only watch. Even the Arrow 3 interceptors, the pride of Israel's long-range defense, were powerless against something that moved this fast, this erratically. From the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, American commanders watched the launch unfold in real time. Satellites tracked the hypersonic weapon as it climbed and dove, weaving through the sky like a predator circling its prey. At U.S. bases in Qatar and Bahrain, pilots sprinted to their fighters, engines howling as crews prepared for the worst. Inside command centers, generals whispered the words no one wanted to hear. "We can't stop it." The missile plunged toward its target zone, then veered sharply, slamming into the desert in a blinding fireball. It was only a test, this time, but the message was unmistakable. Tehran had joined the race for hypersonic weapons, and with them, the balance of power in the Middle East had shifted overnight. In Israel's war rooms, the mood was grim. Maps of Tehran lit up on digital screens as military planners calculated the flight times of these new weapons. If Iran launched from hardened silos near Qom or mobile platforms hidden in the desert, Tel Aviv would have less than 7 minutes to react. Washington, too, would be within range. U.S. carriers in the Gulf suddenly vulnerable, bases across the region exposed. In every simulation, the same conclusion appeared. Reaction time was no longer measured in minutes, but in seconds. Markets reeled as the news spread. Oil prices spiked within hours. Television anchors across the world spoke of a new arms race. One where traditional missile shields no longer guaranteed safety. In Tehran, officials appeared on state television, smiling as they boasted of unstoppable weapons and new deterrents. Crowds chanted in celebration, waving flags, convinced that Iran had just secured its shield against attack. But in Jerusalem, the tone was far darker. The Prime Minister addressed the nation from a secure bunker, his words steady but edged with steel. "Israel faces a new threat," he declared. "One designed to strike our cities and bypass our defenses. We will not allow this danger to grow unchecked." In Washington, similar language followed. Pentagon officials confirmed that hypersonic weapons had fundamentally altered the equation. They were not just faster missiles, they were missiles that made every existing defense obsolete. And here, a question lingers. Where are you watching this from? Because whether you live in Europe, the Middle East, or the United States, this story is no longer distant. Hypersonics travel so far, so fast, that no region can claim safety. And if you haven't already, subscribe now, because what you are hearing today may only be the beginning of a story that could shape tomorrow's headlines. The first launch had ended in a plume of fire in the desert. But the psychological shock was far greater than the physical damage. Israel and the United States were on notice. The countdown to a new kind of war had already begun. The ripple effect of Iran's test was immediate. Across the Middle East, governments and militaries scrambled to adjust to a reality they had not anticipated. In Tel Aviv, Israel's security cabinet convened deep inside an underground bunker. Around the table sat generals, intelligence chiefs, and political leaders, their voices sharp, their faces pale. Maps of Iran glowed on screens, covered in red circles, marking missile sites, underground facilities, and suspected mobile launchers. The debate was fierce. Some argued that Israel could not wait, that a preemptive strike was the only way to ensure survival. They recalled past operations, the destruction of Iraq's Osirak reactor in 1981, the Syrian reactor in 2007. Israel had always moved first when faced with existential threats. Why should this be any different? Others urged caution. A strike on Iran's hypersonic program could ignite a regional war, drawing in Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria, and even direct clashes with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Every option carried unbearable risks. Meanwhile, the United States was moving fast. In the Persian Gulf, U.S. Navy carrier groups spread out to reduce vulnerability. On the decks of destroyers and cruisers, sailors loaded interceptors, knowing they might be useless against weapons this fast. But understanding the symbolism mattered. At air bases in Qatar and Bahrain, squadrons of F-35s and F-22s took to the skies in combat patrols, circling day and night. At Al Udeid Air Base, the largest U.S. installation in the region, alarms tested every hour, pilots sleeping in flight suits, ready to launch within minutes. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates demanded immediate assurances. Their oil fields, skyscraper cities, and ports were now within easy reach of Iranian hypersonics. In Riyadh, ministers spoke bluntly. Without American protection, the Gulf could not defend itself. Diplomats urged Washington to expand missile defenses, even as generals admitted no system was truly ready. On the streets of Israel, fear spread like wildfire. Shelters were restocked, school drills repeated, families kept radios on through the night. Yet, there was also defiance. Posters appeared in Tel Aviv declaring, "We will not bow." Volunteers lined up to support civil defense. A nation accustomed to threats, braced for one it had never seen before. Across the region, oil markets convulsed. Prices soared past $150 per barrel within hours. Airlines canceled flights over Middle Eastern routes. Investors whispered of global recession. A single test launch in Iran had rattled the foundations of the world economy. And as tension climbed, another question emerged. Should the United States and Israel strike first, destroying Iran's missiles before they can be used, or wait and risk a devastating first blow? What do you think? Would a preemptive strike prevent disaster, or would it be the spark that ignites an uncontrollable regional war? In Washington, the president's advisors split into factions. The Hawks argued that waiting meant weakness, that every day Iran built more missiles, hardened more silos, trained more crews. The Doves warned that a first strike could rally the entire Middle East against America, dragging it into another endless war. The Pentagon quietly prepared plans for both options. But in Tehran, the leadership celebrated. State television played triumphant footage of the launch, commentators declaring that Iran had achieved a new deterrent against its enemies. Crowds gathered in the streets, waving flags, chanting slogans. For the first time in decades, many Iranians felt their nation had built something that could not be ignored, something that even the most advanced militaries in the world could not stop. The Middle East had changed overnight, and every nation understood the terrifying truth. In a region already bristling with old rivalries and fragile truces, hypersonics were not just another weapon. They were a countdown. And if you want to follow this countdown as it unfolds, the weapons, the decisions, the consequences, make sure you are subscribed, because the next missile may not be a test. In Moscow, the test was met with a mix of silence and calculation. Official statements denied any involvement, but behind the Kremlin's walls, the truth was well understood. Satellite images revealed Russian technicians present at Iranian test ranges months earlier, and intercepted communications hinted at technology transfers too sensitive to admit publicly. For Russia, still locked in confrontation with NATO, helping Iran build weapons that tied down U.S. forces in the Middle East was more than strategy, it was opportunity. On Russian state television, commentators declared the launch a game changer, suggesting that American carriers would no longer dominate the Persian Gulf. The message to domestic audiences was clear. The United States was vulnerable, and Russia's allies were growing stronger. But for Western intelligence services, the subtext was chilling. If Moscow was willing to help Iran develop hypersonics, what else might it be sharing? Targeting software, missile guidance algorithms, even nuclear warhead designs? In Beijing, the reaction was more careful, but no less significant. Chinese officials publicly urged restraint, but whispers inside defense circles suggested that elements of Iran's new weapons bore similarities to Chinese designs. Hypersonic glide vehicles tested over Xinjiang years earlier now seemed like distant cousins of the missile that had streaked over Tehran's desert sky. If true, China had given Iran a gift that could destabilize the entire Middle East, and by extension, distract the United States from the Pacific. For Washington, the picture darkened. American intelligence briefings spoke of a shadow network, Russian engineers, Chinese schematics, Iranian assembly lines, all converging to create a weapon that outpaced Western defenses. Diplomats scrambled to confront both Moscow and Beijing, but official denials flowed back across the table. No proof, no admission, just smiles and shrugs. Meanwhile, Europe grew uneasy. NATO allies watched the launch footage and realized that hypersonics based in Iran could reach southern Europe as easily as Tel Aviv. From Athens to Rome, politicians asked how long it would be before these weapons were aimed not just at the Middle East, but at Europe's own cities. In Brussels, debates erupted over whether NATO should prepare for collective defense against a threat that now extended far beyond Israel. The implications rippled even further. If Iran could deploy hypersonics, what stopped North Korea from sharing its own designs with Tehran, or worse, from using them itself? What if other nations followed the same path? A world where every regional power possessed unstoppable missiles would be a world where deterrence collapsed entirely. And here lies the dilemma. Should the West treat Iran's hypersonics as an isolated threat, or as the beginning of a new global arms race? What do you think? Is this the spark that others will follow, or will it remain contained to the Middle East? The Kremlin's silence, Beijing's evasions, Tehran's celebrations all told the same story. Hypersonics were no longer the future. They were here, deployed, tested, and ready. The balance of power had shifted, not just in one region, but across the globe. And every capital knew the truth. Once a weapon like this is built, it can never be unbuilt. The great powers had watched Iran rise with technology that should have been decades beyond its reach. And while they denied their role in it, their fingerprints were etched in every glowing contrail over the desert sky. And if you want to keep tracking how far this shadow network extends and where it might ignite the next crisis, subscribe now, because the next launch may not come from Iran alone. It happened on a quiet evening just after sunset. The sky above central Iran flashed with fire as another missile roared upward, its contrail glowing against the fading light. Almost instantly, radars in Israel lit up with alarms. Operators stared at their screens in disbelief. The speed, the angle, the trajectory all screamed the same thing: another hypersonic launch, and this time it was aimed directly toward Israeli airspace. Sirens blared across Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Families dropped everything and rushed underground. Traffic froze on highways as drivers abandoned their cars, sprinting for cover. News anchors broke into live broadcasts, their voices trembling as they repeated the only word that mattered: missile. The Israeli Air Force reacted in seconds. Arrow 3 interceptors were primed, Iron Dome batteries scanned the skies, and pilots scrambled into their cockpits. But deep down, every commander knew the truth. Against a hypersonic weapon moving at Mach 10, their defenses were little more than blindfolds. They fired anyway, streaks of interceptor missiles clawing into the sky, but none made contact. The intruder was too fast, too unpredictable. In Washington, the National Security Council convened within minutes. Video feeds from satellites showed the missile racing across the Middle East. Pentagon analysts shouted over one another, their screens painting a picture that left no time for comfort. "Impact in 4 minutes," one voice repeated. "No interception possible." But then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the missile veered off course. It plunged into the Mediterranean, detonating harmlessly over the sea in a blinding explosion of light and water. It was a test, another demonstration. But this time, the terror it left behind was greater than the fireball. In Israel, panic turned to fury. The Prime Minister slammed his fist against the table, demanding options for a preemptive strike. Fighter squadrons were ordered to stand by, bombers armed with bunker-busting munitions, fueled and ready. The message was clear: Israel could no longer afford to wait. NATO's response was just as tense. Commanders in Brussels debated whether the hypersonic threat to Israel and U.S. bases in the Gulf constituted grounds for alliance action. Some argued that collective defense demanded immediate retaliation. Others warned that opening a front with Iran would stretch NATO beyond its limits, while war still burned in Eastern Europe. The room split, voices rising, the weight of global war pressing on every decision. Across the Middle East, the streets told a different story. In Beirut, in Riyadh, in Dubai, people stared at their phones, watching shaky videos of the fireball over the sea. Some cheered, others prayed, but all understood the same thing. Iran had proved it could strike whenever it chose. Markets plunged again. Oil soared past $200 a barrel. Flights were grounded across the region, and embassies prepared evacuation plans. The world felt the tremor of something too big to contain. And here, the dilemma became unbearable. Should Israel and the United States strike now, eliminating Iran's missile program before it became unstoppable, or hold back, risking the first true hypersonic strike against their cities? What would you do? Is waiting more dangerous than acting? In Tehran, state television declared victory. Officials smiled, claiming the launch had sent a message. And indeed it had, not just to Israel and the United States, but to the entire world. Hypersonic fire could now fall at any moment, and no one knew where it would land. The Middle East stood at the edge of war, and the world knew it might only take one more launch to push it over. The night sky above the Middle East is no longer just a place of stars and silence. It is a battlefield waiting to ignite. With every launch, every glowing contrail rising from Iranian deserts, the balance of power shifts further toward the unknown. Israel, the United States, and their allies watch helplessly, their missile defenses outmatched, their reaction time measured not in minutes, but in seconds. The threat is not only physical, it is psychological. A single hypersonic strike could devastate a city before its people even heard the siren. The knowledge alone erodes confidence, pushes leaders toward harsher decisions, and makes the world far less stable. It is a weapon built not just to destroy, but to terrify. Families in Tel Aviv sleep in shelters. U.S. sailors in the Gulf watch the horizon with dread. Oil markets tremble, economies buckle, and diplomats search for answers that no longer exist. Hypersonics are not the future. They are already here, and with them, the fragile illusion of safety is gone. And now the question remains: will Israel and the United States strike first to end the threat? Or will they wait until the first missile falls on their cities? What do you think? The countdown has already begun. The launch we just witnessed may have ended over the sea, but the next one may not. If you want to follow the world's most dangerous flashpoints, the weapons shaping tomorrow's wars, and the stories the world cannot ignore, make sure you are subscribed, because the next headline could change history overnight.